It happened so suddenly that I almost convinced myself I had misheard. One moment, I was standing in the warmth of my son's home, holding the handles of my worn suitcase, and the next, I felt the sharp sting of rejection as the door closed behind me. The weight of my own belongings pressed into my hands as if to remind me that this was real, that my son and his wife had decided I no longer belonged under their roof. The cold, evening air wrapped itself around me, and I stood frozen on the porch, staring at the door that had just shut me out. I tried to steady my breathing, but inside, I was crumbling. My mind rushed backward through decades of sacrifice, of nights spent helping with homework, of meals cooked after long days of work, of every small moment where I put his needs before my own. And yet, here I was, treated as if I were little more than an inconvenience to be discarded. The neighborhood was quiet, pristine lawns lined with carefully trimmed hedges, but all I could hear was the echo of my own son's indifference. I could still see the expression on my daughter-in-law's face before the door closed, her polished smile carrying more triumph than compassion. She had made her point clear. I was no longer welcome. That smile would haunt me, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I had long feared, that in their eyes, I had lost value. The sting of betrayal was sharper than the chill in the air. I stood there gripping the suitcase handles until my knuckles ached, willing myself not to cry. Not here. Not now. Not where the neighbors could see. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the words died in my throat. There was nothing left to say. The silence was its own kind of cruelty. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about losing a place to stay. It was about losing the respect that I thought would never fade between a parent and child. It was about realizing that years of love and devotion could be overshadowed by pride, by greed, or by the shallow chase for appearances. I finally stepped away from the porch, the weight of my life reduced to a few bags. Each step down the walkway echoed like a chapter closing behind me. As the cab pulled up and I slid into the back seat, I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back at the house I had once called a second home. That night was the beginning of something I never expected: the descent into loneliness, into hardship, and into a life I would be forced to rebuild from nothing. And though I didn't know it yet, that cruel moment on the porch would become the turning point of my entire life. The first night alone was the hardest. The cab had dropped me at a rundown motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered like it was gasping for breath. My room smelled faintly of mildew and stale cigarettes, even though the manager swore it was a non-smoking room. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the television from the room next door, muffled voices laughing at a comedy while I sat on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at the 2 suitcases that now contained everything I had left. The humiliation clung to me like a second skin. I replayed the scene at the house over and over, searching for the moment when things could have gone differently. I kept wondering how the bond between mother and child could be so easily severed, how years of love could be dismissed in a single cold act. The ache in my chest was heavier than the weight of the suitcases I had carried. The days blurred together in a haze of silence, and cheap instant coffee brewed in a dented machine that sputtered more than it poured. The carpet beneath my feet was rough and threadbare, each step scratching against my skin. At night, the hum of the air conditioner rattled like an old man wheezing, and I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own loneliness. Meals were simple: half a sandwich from the corner deli, a can of soup heated on a hot plate. I tried to convince myself that this was temporary, that somehow it would all work out. But the truth was harder to swallow than the food itself. I had no plan, no job, and nowhere to call home. Yet, even in those bleakest days, a small ember of something refused to die. I remembered the years when I had worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet, when I had kept my family afloat with nothing but determination and sheer willpower. If I had survived then, could I not survive now? I didn't have answers, but I had resolve. As I pulled the thin motel blanket over myself one night, I whispered a silent promise I would not let this be the end of me. I was broken, yes, but I would not stay broken. Somewhere inside the ruins of my life, I knew there had to be a way forward, and I was going to find it. I had grown used to the silence of the motel room, the way the hum of the air conditioner filled the gaps where laughter and conversation used to be. Most mornings, I wandered to the small library downtown just to escape the four walls closing in on me. The library had free Wi-Fi, free air conditioning, and most importantly, it gave me the illusion that I still had purpose. One morning, as I sat scrolling half-heartedly through job postings I knew I wasn't qualified for, something caught my eye. A flyer pinned to the corkboard by the entrance, its corners curling from being overlooked. It advertised a community program for small businesses that wanted help with bookkeeping and management. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at it. Bookkeeping that had been my quiet strength for decades. Back when my husband ran his small contracting business, I had balanced every ledger, tracked every expense, caught mistakes before they became disasters. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something I had been good at. At first, I brushed the thought away. Who would want someone my age? Someone whose life had so visibly fallen apart. But then, I felt that faint spark again. The whisper of a memory reminding me that I wasn't always this lost. My hands still remembered the rhythm of numbers, the way columns lined up neatly when everything balanced. Maybe, just maybe, there was still value in that. I pulled the flyer down and tucked it into my bag as though it were something fragile and precious. On the walk back to the motel, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't know if this would lead anywhere, but for the first time since being pushed out of my son's home, I felt the flicker of possibility. That night, I spread the flyer on the desk and read every word. The program was open to volunteers at first, but there was mention of paid part-time work for those who proved reliable. My heart pounded as I realized it was something within reach, not a dream too big to grasp, but a small, steady step forward. I lay awake long past midnight, staring at the ceiling, imagining what it might feel like to contribute again, to be needed for something only I could provide. The thought filled me with both fear and hope, tangled together in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a miracle, not yet, but it was a beginning, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't let it slip away. Something was shifting, and though I didn't fully understand it, I was ready to find out where it might lead. At first, the steps were small, so small they almost felt invisible. I started by volunteering a few hours a week through the program I had discovered, helping a local shop owner organize receipts and untangle a pile of invoices. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay at the beginning was non-existent. But there was a quiet satisfaction in watching order return where there had once been chaos. Each spreadsheet balanced felt like proof that I still had something to offer, that my mind and my hands had not lost their strength. One shop turned into two, and soon I was splitting my time between a hardware store and a family-owned bakery. The bakery became my favorite, not because of the work itself, but because of the people. The owner, a kind woman named Helen, always slipped me a loaf of fresh bread at the end of the day, saying it was extra. It wasn't charity, it was camaraderie, and in her simple kindness, I felt less invisible. The motel gave way to a tiny studio apartment downtown. It was far from luxurious, but it was mine. I hung a few photographs on the wall, faded snapshots of my children when they were young, back when they still reached for my hand without hesitation. Looking at those pictures used to bring pain, but now they fueled something else: determination. I told myself that I would not let their rejection define my ending. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual acquaintances that my son and his wife were doing just fine, parading through neighborhood gatherings and social media posts as if their lives were spotless. They never mentioned me, of course. To the world, I was simply erased. But while they polished their image, I was laying foundations quiet, steady, and stronger than anything they could see. Opportunities began to grow. Word spread that I could make sense of messy books and find where money was slipping away. Small businesses began calling on me, not just for help, but for trust. Each new client felt like a vote of confidence, a reminder that being discarded did not mean being useless. With each step, my pride grew, not the loud, boastful kind, but the kind that blooms quietly inside when you know you've earned your place. I wasn't looking for applause. I was building a life brick by brick, one that no one could take away this time. And even as I lived humbly, I could feel it, the slow gathering of momentum, like the pull of a tide before it crests into a wave. Something bigger was coming, and I was ready to meet it head on. Success didn't arrive with fireworks, it crept in quietly, almost shy at first, until one day I realized it had taken root all around me. The small bookkeeping jobs multiplied, and soon I was managing the finances for half a dozen shops across town. What began as scattered part-time work grew into steady contracts, and before long, I was running my own little consulting business. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman they had tossed out with 2 suitcases was now trusted to safeguard other people's livelihoods. The money wasn't extravagant at first, but it was steady, and with each passing month, I saw my savings account grow. I was able to trade my cramped studio for a modest 1-bedroom apartment with sunlight streaming through wide windows. I furnished it with pieces I chose myself, simple, but mine, bought with the fruits of my own labor. For the first time in years, I felt not just like I was surviving, but that I was living. The real turning point came when one of my clients, the hardware store owner, introduced me to his cousin, a regional manager for a chain of small retail outlets. He had heard about my ability to streamline messy finances and asked if I would consult for several of their locations. That contract tripled my income overnight. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the papers in front of me, my pen shaking slightly as I signed. It was more money than I had ever imagined managing for myself. And then came the twist I never expected. As I grew in confidence, I decided to revisit some old paperwork I had set aside after my husband's passing. Among the stacks of documents, I found something overlooked: a small investment account he had opened years before, quietly accumulating value. I had forgotten about it entirely, but there it was, waiting for me. The balance was enough to change everything. Combined with my growing business, it meant freedom. I used part of that money as a down payment on a small office space downtown. Walking into that space for the first time, seeing my name on the frosted glass door, I felt a surge of pride I can't even describe. No one had given me a handout. No one had saved me. I had done this myself. Yet, beneath the pride, I sensed the faint tremor of something else in anticipation. Success doesn't go unnoticed forever. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the same family who had cast me aside would come knocking, pretending their sudden interest was love. Little did they know, the woman they threw out was no longer the same. I was stronger now, and I was ready. It was a Saturday morning when the knock came, sharp and insistent, echoing through the new home I had built for myself. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door, already knowing who it would be. My son, my daughter-in-law. The very people who had once watched me walk away with nothing now stood on my doorstep, their faces carefully arranged with practiced smiles. I let them speak first. Their words dripped with sweetness, but beneath the surface, I heard it the desperation. They spoke of family, of missed years, of how they wanted to reconnect, but their eyes betrayed them. My son's gaze wandered over the furniture, the polished hardwood, the quiet symbols of success I had earned without them. My daughter-in-law's smile stretched too wide, her tone just a little too eager. They hadn't come for love. They had come because they needed something. As they circled their way to the truth, I stayed quiet, calm, inside, though I felt a storm. Memories of that night on the porch burned fresh in my chest. The humiliation, the loneliness, I carried it all. And yet, I didn't let it break my voice. Instead, I listened until finally they revealed what they truly wanted: help. Financial help. A lifeline out of the trouble they had created for themselves. That was when I let the silence stretch, heavy and unrelenting, until they shifted uncomfortably. Then I told them what I knew, that I was aware my son had lost his job months earlier, not weeks, and had been hiding the truth. That I knew about the second mortgage they had quietly taken on their home, and the credit card debts piling under my daughter-in-law's name. I told them how I had seen through the facade long before they ever showed up on my doorstep. The look on their faces was almost enough to make me pity them. Almost. But pity wasn't what I felt. What I felt was vindication. For years, I had been made to believe I was the burden, that I was the one without worth. And yet here they were, stripped of their pride, standing in front of me because they believed my worth could save them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Calmly, I laid the truth bare, each word landing heavier than the last. I told them I would not be their solution, not this time. They had discarded me when I was vulnerable, and now I was stronger than ever, strong enough to say no. As I watched the color drain from their faces, I felt it fully, the power that comes not from revenge, but from finally reclaiming your place. They had underestimated me once. They would never do it again. And I knew this confrontation was not the end, but the prelude to my final act of justice. When the door finally closed behind them, I stood in the quiet of my home and felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one begging for love or acceptance. I was the one setting the terms, and that shift, subtle yet seismic, was the justice I had been waiting for. I made it clear that they no longer held power over me. My son and his wife had chosen to discard me once, and I had chosen to survive without them. Now it was my turn to draw the boundary lines. They would not cross into my life again unless they came with truth, humility, and real change. Until then, my door was closed to them. But it wasn't closed to everyone. My grandchildren, innocent in all of this, had eyes full of questions and hearts that still needed love. When they reached out to me, hesitant at first, unsure of whether they were welcome, I opened my arms wide. They were never the enemy. They were the ones who had been robbed of a grandmother's embrace, and I would not allow their parents' mistakes to steal another moment from us. It was bittersweet. Yes, the laughter of my grandchildren at my kitchen table filled me with joy. But it also reminded me of all the birthdays, holidays, and ordinary afternoons we had lost. I couldn't change the past, but I could reclaim the future, one memory at a time. I didn't see what I had done as revenge. Revenge would have been about inflicting pain. But this was about reclaiming dignity. It was about showing that no one, not even family, had the right to define my worth or decide my fate. Justice wasn't loud or cruel. It was steady, dignified, and final. As I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt an unshakable peace settle inside me. The woman they had thrown away was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally free. And in that quiet, I realized that this wasn't just my story of survival. It was a story of boundaries, of love preserved for those who deserved it, and of the strength it takes to walk away from those who don't. The chapter of betrayal was finally closed. Ahead of me lay something far greater, the chance to live fully on my own terms. That understanding became the bridge into my final reflection, the lesson I knew I had to share with anyone who had ever felt cast aside. In the end, what I learned is something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. No one else has the right to define your worth. Not a spouse, not a boss, not even your own children. People may discard you. They may decide you no longer serve their needs, but that does not mean you are without value. Worth is not given, it is lived, proven, and carried within you. My journey from that cold night on the porch to the life I have now was not easy. It was filled with silence, with grief, and with hard work. But in that struggle, I discovered something priceless: resilience. Resilience is not loud or glamorous. It is quiet, steady, and often invisible to those who are not looking. Yet it is the very thing that turns brokenness into strength and betrayal into justice. I share my story because I know there are others out there who feel cast aside, forgotten, or underestimated. If that is you, please hear me. Your story isn't over. You are stronger than the people who doubted you, and you are capable of building something far beyond what they ever imagined. If my journey resonates with you, I would love for you to share your own story in the comments. Let's remind each other that survival, growth, and dignity are possible, even in the face of rejection. And if you found comfort or inspiration here, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening to my story. It is not just a story of pain, but of possibility. And maybe, just maybe, it can be the reminder you need that the best chapters of your life can still be ahead.